one poster in the right place could be seen by thousands of people.
Right.
And could really help maybe make a change in people's perception of, in this case, importance of natural spaces, of the animals, of our relationship to nature, of, huge issues facing us, climate change, global warming, water, air, just, the planet.
This is A New Angle, and I'm your host, Justin Angle, marketing professor at the University of Montana. This podcast is my chance to speak with cool people doing awesome things in and around the great state of Montana. We are proudly underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot. Hey folks, welcome back and thanks for tuning in. I am super excited for this week's guest, Monte Dolack. When you think of Western art, or art in Montana, or art representative of Missoula, the name Monte Dolack is surely top of mind. Monte's work is currently on exhibition at the Montana Museum of Art and Culture. The work is spectacular, and you should absolutely check it out. In this conversation, we learn all about Monte's development as an artist and how he approaches the various media in which he works. It's a story of grit, hustle, and experimentation, and I'm excited for you to hear it right now. Okay, so we're here today with Monte Dolack. Monte, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me.
So, when I moved to Missoula, 8 years ago, a stroll down Front Street, the Monte Dolack Gallery. You were sort of the most prominent artist in the community, and in a community in which art is a prominent part. So it's great to meet you, and I'm excited to learn more about your work.
Well, thank you. Yeah, when I had the gallery on Front Street, through a First Friday event, every First Friday for 22 years.
Wow.
And I stepped away from that about 4 years ago to just concentrate on art making.
Mm-hmm.
The business aspect of running a gallery has its, I won't say energy drain, but it can take away from the creative side.
Sure.
And yet it introduces your work and provides an amazing connection to meeting people and understanding the community and watching things evolve and change. Because even in the last 4 years since I closed that gallery, Missoula has been undergoing a renaissance.
Mm-hmm.
And there were times, I actually had a studio across the street above the Top Hat.
Okay.
Which has, undergone a renaissance too. But so I was on Front Street in downtown Missoula for many years.
Yeah, you've seen a lot.
I was up there for about 14 years. And this is Missoula. There were times where we were just hanging on with our fingernails.
Right,
right. There was kind of a skeleton crew, just, very intrigued and interested and really cared about helping create a community that focused more on the arts and music. And we threw events, and we're involved in a number of things, starting in about 1974.
Yeah, when did First Friday start up as a thing in town?
That was in the mid-'80s.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you must have been at the center of the start of that, I would imagine.
Well, Jeff Sutton had a gallery called the Sutton West Gallery. Prior to that, it was the Clark Fork Gallery.
Okay.
And he started the First Friday. And of course, they had First Thursday in Seattle, and here and there, communities were working on a time that
some regular meeting time.
Could go and experience the arts and visit the cafes, and it does catch on. It's like, out to lunch. It's Wednesday, let's go, or it's First Friday. Do you want to go?
Right, it becomes a thing that you just do.
Yeah, and when I had my studio above the Top Hat, I didn't have an official gallery. It was a studio, kind of more of a salon studio. Mm-hmm. And people would come up, but I wasn't an official First Friday person. In fact, I would go out to First Friday.
Sure.
Once I opened the gallery in 1993, which was directly across the street from my studio above the Top Hat. Mm-hmm. And at that time, the Top Hat was, a great music and dive bar. And, it was a time when everyone smoked. and the smoke would, over the course of an evening,
Oh gosh, yeah, just
would
permeate your studio.
drift upstairs, and
Yeah.
I'd come in, and I wasn't a tobacco smoker, so I'd come in, and for the first, a number of years, it didn't really bother me. I mean, people would walk in to a building and light up a smoke. They
Yeah,
wouldn't even ask,
yeah.
"Do you mind if I smoke?"
Right.
They'd just do it. And by the time I was maybe ready to make a change, the cigarette smoke had actually been the thing that had driven me.
Sure.
Because space was great.
Yeah.
It was the original 1930s Art Deco radio station, and was very modern when it was created. Had portholes, and it had been a studio like the one we're in now, only more extensive, and a number of well-known journalists and radio personalities got their start there. Connection of the university journalism department, and there's always been something about Missoula that's kind of brought creative people here, photographers, musicians. I think at that time mostly writers.
Yeah.
And the creative writing department brought people, and they brought their friends, and their friends came and visited their friends, and I think a community puts out signals about what it is.
Sure.
And it either it repels certain kinds of people or attracts them. And Missoula has continued to attract, I think, creative people that are very interested in the outdoors and nature. And you have 4 seasons, so you have to be prepared for that. But that's part of what kept me here, is proximity to natural spaces that are close.
And you grew up in Great Falls, right?
I did. I was born and grew up there.
Yeah, and
through high school.
it was your touch point to Missoula, your time here at the University of Montana? Was that your first kind of immersion?
It was, although I was in a garage band in high school.
Okay.
Called Out of Sight.
Yeah.
And all through high school.
What kind of music were you guys playing?
Rock and roll.
Yeah.
Inspired by the Rolling Stones.
Nice.
And, everything that was happening in the 66 to 68. And we would write some of our own tunes, too. But on the weekends, we would travel around the state, playing for dances. Occasionally we'd get a homecoming or an after-game dance. But we played Missoula 3 or 4 times.
Yeah. And what were you playing?
I play keyboards.
Keyboards. Okay.
Yeah. And which I continue to do, and our band continues to get together once a year.
Oh, for real?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. We're old guys now, but we still rock.
I'm sure you do. Yeah, I can tell.
Well, I think the important thing for me, connecting art and business, was when we played in the band, we had to book a gig. Which means you had to call someone that headed up an event center, get the gig,
and then get people there, right?
Right, and sign a contract.
Yep.
And then usually the promotion was on us.
Yeah.
So we would silkscreen posters in our basement, and we were inspired by the posters that were coming out of San Francisco at that time.
Yep.
And our art teacher had gone to San Francisco, 1966 or 67,
Wow.
and brought back posters for the Fillmore Auditorium and Avalon and the Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane and all the bands that were coming out of San Francisco at that time.
Was that like, what do the parents in Great Falls think of that? The teacher bringing back all the stuff from not only the big city, but San Francisco in particular.
Yeah, I think they didn't even have a clue that was all going on. So we became kind of disciples of that. It was like, whoa, this is really cool. And it had a great effect on us. At that time, you really couldn't go online and see what was happening.
That was your connection.
Information was at the library or maybe in periodicals or, just talking to someone who had been there. And at the same time, he also introduced us to... we were just going through a transition of abstract expressionism into pop art.
Okay.
So that pop would be like Andy Warhol,
Sure.
Robert Rauschenberg,
Yeah.
And that. So we came online, and so I kind of rejected Charlie Russell. It's like, we live in a different time now.
Sure,
So,
old tired style. Not me.
so you're trying to find a voice in this changing space. George Gogas, if you know his work, founded by he was a high school art teacher, very good one, and he loved the West and has horses and is very much a Western person, but he's a modern artist.
Okay.
So when he retired, he struggled with that same issue. How do you reconcile these two different things without just simply following Charlie Russell? So he put together a series of paintings called "If Pablo Picasso and Charlie Russell Met, what would it look like?"
Sure.
So his Western paintings became Cubist, and Charlie and Pablo meeting up and doing various things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was trying to reconcile those same interests and inputs and kind of synthesize them into a coherent vision.
Yeah, and at what point are you thinking, like, I want this to be my life's work? Like, I want to make art and have that be my profession.
Well, I remember my father worked at the copper refinery. It was called the Anaconda Copper Company in Great Falls, which was the biggest industry there. And so I worked there summers going to college.
Okay.
And I would tell the guys, well, I want to be an artist. I'm like 18 or 19. And
Yeah,
they
that probably
would,
wasn't a very common.
they'd laugh.
Yeah.
Artiste.
Yeah.
You better keep your job.
Sure.
Because, hey, that's a dream that, is, impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of worked my way through becoming an artist by going to school and also getting work-study jobs that had to do, I thought anything I could get that kept a pencil or a paintbrush in my hand. So I did cartoons for the Kaiman.
Sure.
And
didn't you do charts and stuff for the Bureau of Business and Economic Research, which we share a building with now?
Well, probably just covers.
Okay.
Just
for their publications
art and design.
and so forth.
Yeah, it was the publications department. And so that was good practice.
Yeah, and it's hustle, too. You're getting your name out there.
And also at that time, there was a print shop on campus.
Okay.
That was really a good one.
Yeah.
And a number of people worked there. A lot of printing happened there. It's gone now. But a fellow named Don Clute, I remember when I came in, and he headed up the print department. And here I am, an art student, but I'm learning fine art. Nothing about how to really integrate graphic art.
Sure.
To being printed, and somehow, how does all that work? Well, it was a big mystery.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a mystery to me because you work in a bunch of different
he
media.
walked me through it. The first time I came in, he said, I can't believe you're an art student and you don't know about a blue pencil. You could do your at that time, your drawing, your base drawing, before you inked it. And if you did it in regular pencil will show.
Okay.
Blue pencil is invisible to the camera. So that's where you make your notations and many, many things like that. So over the course of time, every time I would go in, it was like having an art class that was dedicated to...
Sure, but like outside of the traditional tracks here academically.
Yes, applied art.
You're getting street smarts, basically.
How do you take your art and apply it? So
yeah, interesting.
It's so funny. I learned that as just a work study student, where I probably got as much information as I did out of any of my art classes, more. Because after that, I was able to actually get a job because I understood something about graphics.
That seems like, and I don't know if I necessarily want to railroad the conversation down this way, but it seems like a tension that exists in a lot of disciplines, in particular artistic disciplines, whether it's music or fine arts or whatever.
Yeah.
Literature is
journalism versus poetry.
You get so grounded
literature.
in the way things have been done in the past, which is important, and it's important to understand that history and lineage. But also, in this instance, it sort of constrained your ability through the traditional sort of academic channels to get exposure to a lot of the newer technology and what was happening.
Yeah, and during this whole period, I was painting and doing ceramics and sculpture. So one of my work-study jobs was also being the sculpture teacher. At that time, it was Ted Waddell, being his assistant.
Okay.
So I had to make sure all the sculpture tools, the torches, all the welding equipment.
So you're doing everything.
Yeah. And so work-study truly was work-study.
Yeah.
And then I have a class with Rudy Audio or with Don Bunzy or Maxine Blackmere, Walter Hook.
Uh-huh.
These people are all gone now. They've all passed on. But I did have classes with them, and Rudy was a mentor of mine. Sometimes, it's one thing to say, well, here's how you make something, and it's another thing just to have a conversation. What's happened to me is I found that two things feed each other, the art-making process and then the work that's applied or commissioned. So I would take what I learned on the graphic side and I could move that over into the fine art making.
Okay.
So I'm learning a bit more about technique and how to prepare something to be printed. I had the interest in the posters from high school, and I started making posters for various groups and organizations. Mostly in music and events. I did some of the Caregiver posters, the big fundraiser. They used to have a giant Caregiver.
Yeah.
There's a documentary about it. That's
for real?
interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, you get 10,000 people.
That's a lot of kegs.
People listening to, pretty major bands. A lot of, well-known bands and the musical artists appeared at those, and those were seen by a lot of people. So every time you put something out there that's seen, it kind of attracts. You put a poster out there, people come to you. Okay, well, could you do a poster for our music event or our this or that? And at a certain point, rather than moving to the big city, I decided to stay here. I had opportunities to do work in film, and at that time, when you did a record jacket cover, it was that was
actually a big deal.
Yeah, it was 12 by 12 inches too, so it was a lot of real estate before everything went to. I know there's a huge comeback now in vinyl.
With vinyl,
and that's so cool because you get to have a big cover too.
Right.
But and I did a number of those working in film and working in music. And I couldn't move to the city. It was too urban. I tried a couple of times. San Francisco, L.A., and
Missoula was just where you wanted to be.
Well,
Montana.
Out my back door was a wild space.
Yeah.
So with the advent over the last number of years, I remember wishing at one point I was working on a poster for a film, and my client was in New York. We could talk on the phone, but in order for him to see what I was doing, I had to express mail the sketches and studies to him, and then he'd look at them, and it was like, okay, and then I'd get the artwork. And I had less time to make the work because of the shipping involved. And I thought, geez, wouldn't it be fantastic if someday there was a way to we could both see what we were doing, and
imagine that.
Yeah, imagine that.
You could take out this thing from your pocket, snap a photo, and send it.
It would make it so easier to live here. And so I kind of quit doing things for film and records and started concentrating more in my region because I was closer to it.
Yep.
And that was a time in Missoula in the mid-'70s where a lot of small businesses were taking off the hip culture, in fact, one of the founding fathers, John P. Anderson, started the Ricochet, just passed away this last week. He'd lived in Bali for the last 20 years.
Okay.
But there were a small group of young entrepreneurs that started businesses. And that were hip. They're part of the hip culture that is it's everywhere now in Missoula. And so I did logos and designs and posters for the one was the Crystal Theater,
Okay.
which was
Yep.
like the Roxy, only it was where Guild Brewing is now,
Mm-hmm.
and it showed American, foreign repertory films. Often came without a poster, so I would do a quick marker pen poster.
Sure.
Yeah, and free movies and popcorn.
Mm-hmm.
And that probably doing 100 of those.
Wow.
It's
Ton
good
of
practice.
repetitions. Yeah.
Good
So,
practice.
as you're kind of working through this, like you're out there hustling, you're doing a bunch of different types of art for a bunch of different types of constituents. How are you sort of finding your own style? Do you have a style that's distinctive? When you sort of read about your work or see it, the word whimsical sort of comes around all the time. I don't know how you feel about that term, but your style is distinct. And how does that kind of emerge in this process?
Well, I also became very interested in travel about that same time.
Okay.
So I think mid 70s, I went to Europe with a backpack and stayed in youth hostels and went to the great museums in Paris and London and Amsterdam and I wound up down in Morocco. And that exposed me to so much amazing
Opened your world.
art and architecture. And so when I came back, I think that added and the visits to New York and San Francisco, especially the museums in both Oakland and San Francisco. I saw a lot of things that were inspirational or helped get me going in the direction. There was a school of funk based out of Davis.
Yeah.
And a number of artists whose work had humor in it. Serious work, but it had humor.
A New Angle is brought to you by First Security Bank and Blackfoot, two cool companies doing awesome things all over Montana.
Hey, this is Ryan Tutel of ESPN Radio in Missoula, and you're listening to A New Angle.
Robert Arneson, his sculptures, usually huge portraits of his head, going through some, crazy, wild, connection to the world, but it was visible. And I decided I really I'd been trying to fit in as an abstract artist, and I did a number of abstracts that were illusionistic, and I'd become technically very, very proficient by then, and doing all of these things. And the abstract artists, and then the pop artists, and then kind of anything goes now. I mean, on to minimalism and performance art. And but I decided I wanted to work with images from the visible world. So I would call it more surreal than whimsical.
Okay.
My work. And the surrealists were a group of artists in Europe. Man Ray and René Magritte are a couple of them, who their work had humor, but it also had irony. And humor with irony can become serious humor.
Right, provocative.
Yeah. And so I became, of course, as many people, interested in the work of Magritte, where basically he could formalize a painting with objects that were absolutely different than each other. But he put them together and paint them with the same degree of accuracy, and it became believable. Like an apple the size of a grand piano sitting next to each other.
Yeah, okay.
And it's like, oh, okay. And, his most famous ones are the man in the bowler hat with the umbrella floating in space. And it just, being able to use your imagination. Salvador Dali would be like an extreme example of that, where his stuff goes much further, but he's probably the most famous. And his work was more dreamlike. And
and this notion of taking reality and playing with it.
Yeah. Exactly.
And it makes me think of your Intruder series.
Invaders.
Sorry.
Intruders is good.
Yeah. Putting animals, very realistic depictions of animals, but in scenes that when you see them, are I don't want to say they make no sense. It makes a certain type of sense.
I'm doing one right now.
Okay.
Of a series of some megafauna paintings. I'd mostly worked with animals in my region, but then I decided not that long ago that you could work with any animal in any part of the world. So you're really making it's that dichotomy between making art and making art that works for the community you live in or the language base or the part of the country, and then making things that maybe speak to a wider audience. Case in point, when I still had the gallery, I had just maybe the year before finished a commission for a group that was working on habitat for bears.
Okay.
International Bear Trust. So there was 8 different kinds of bears that live in different parts of the world. And I had created this map of the world, painted a large bear over it, and then had just a lot of pictorial elements going on. But you didn't need language to look at it and see what it meant. And there were a group of women visiting from, I think it was Pakistan or Iran maybe, and through the university. And it was about 10 or 12, and they were educators. And none of them spoke English. And they had the headscarves, and they walked around and looked at some of my stuff. And the animals, the Invaders series, they were like, what does that mean? Beavers and a...
Right.
But they saw that Bear Trust International, and they all gathered around
clicked.
it. They understood it. And so visual images that can work in other languages. Of course, other cultures are tough. I had the same experience in Japan. I went there a number of times and marketed my work there, and also other countries.
But you've been able to use that kind of notion that images can bring an issue to life pretty prominently in your work, particularly partnering with environmentally oriented organizations.
Well, that was that love of nature that kept me in Montana.
Yeah.
And I started working with some of those groups. And I didn't think of myself as a wildlife artist at all, but as soon as I worked...
And are those groups approaching you to commission work, or are you wanting to be more of an activist? Like, how's this working?
One of the early ones was Nature Conservancy approached me, and I did an early piece, and it was about an area on the Front Range called Pine Butte. It's also where they found, that's also where Egg Mountain is, where Jack Horner discovered the clutch of dinosaur eggs that, became very important discovery. It's also an area where grizzly bears and different other animals have been able to come off the Front Range and to this butte, which is also a swamp. It's a really interesting area. And the forest leading up to it is a savanna, not your normal forest. Very interesting. It's due west of Shoto. So I went up there and did research. I was afraid I'd run into a grizzly bear.
Yeah.
And I didn't. But I learned about them, and I worked a little bit with John Craighead, Craigheads, and he gave me some reference material of bears he'd photographed. And so I created this poster. And Nature Conservancy had purchased the whole area so it could remain pristine. And of course, later David Letterman purchased the ranch right next door, so he's their neighbor. And I grew up in Great Falls, looking at those mountains, and it was so interesting to get into them and start working with, kind of putting science and natural history and naturalists together with art.
Sure.
And it was like, I really like this. This is,
This feels right.
Because, even as a kid, I loved to go out and poke around the river, the Missouri River, and ponds, and look at birds and snakes and frogs and turtles and whatever I could find. Yeah, and loved to fish, too. So grew up fishing on the Missouri. before there was a whole industry built around guiding people.
Right.
It was rare to see a boat in those days. Most people just fished from the bank or wade fished. Occasionally you'd see a boat, but it was rare.
Yeah. So you were talking about you got involved with the Nature Conservancy. They commissioned a piece.
I did 3 pieces
Okay.
for them eventually. One was for Egg Mountain, too.
Right.
I worked with Jack Horner on that one, the paleontologist, who, if you don't know who he is probably one of the most well-known paleontologists in the world. Based out of Bozeman. That's one reason the Museum of the Rockies is there, which has a focus on paleontology. And he was the advisor on all of the Jurassic Park films.
Okay.
And in fact, the first book, Jurassic Park, before it was made into a movie, he's the character in it.
Oh, for real?
Yeah. And he's a great guy. And has a real sense of humor, too, but a deep grounding in science. And he's intuitive.
Uh-huh.
And so meeting people like that, I try to integrate some of that into my art.
Yeah.
Because, he'd look at a dinosaur and go, yeah, I got the muscle wrong. There's skeleton under there and this muscle attaches.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. But we don't know what color they were.
Yeah.
So
you need an artist to sort of fill in those blanks.
Free rein on the color. And I just did 1 or 2 dinosaur pieces, but I did a tremendous amount of research. So each one of these posters would lead maybe to something else for another wilderness advocacy group or conservation organization. And, working with the individuals involved and then getting the poster's beautifully produced. I've worked with a printer in Great Falls, Advanced Litho Printing, for the last 25 years. And I was able to use those early influences that I got from my work study here at the university and some of the fine art to create these things and also have a rapport with the printers. Because oftentimes the people bring in something to have it printed and they don't really understand the process and what's possible.
That's got to be critical in your work.
Well,
it has to. What prints has to depict what you want it to.
I think because I have a lot of respect for the printers and the pressmen and everything that goes into making something like that. It's complex. You see it all the time, something printed, but when you really go in and see what that industry involves, it's complex and interesting. And so because of my respect, we developed mutual respect, and I was able to work very closely right on the press, helping ink the press up, so it was like printmaking, making these posters, but it was more than that. I was adding extra touch plates. Some of them would go through the press 12 or 14 times or more in order to get the colors right. And they were great at accommodating me. It's like, wow, that sounds interesting. Let's try it.
Sure.
So,
well, they're probably learning too and wanting to support the work in their range, I would think.
So that, was interesting. I probably did 200, I don't know how many posters for different organizations and groups. And each one was a printmaking process and also involved the business of, these things cost a considerable amount of money to produce because I'm using the best paper, the best inks, the whatever time and energy, creative time I put into it, and just, blood, sweat, and tears sometimes.
And are some of these choices with regard to the form in which your art takes pragmatic? I mean, I'm imagining some sort of an organization probably wants to distribute your work in a way, so that means a poster is maybe the most pragmatic, whereas another time you want to create an oil painting, which is sort of a single thing. How does that kind of play into your choices?
You just do both.
Okay.
It kind of all one thing. The commission works, you're working with an individual or group who've come to you. Usually in my case, they come to me and ask, could I do something? And I would write a proposal. Well, here's what we could do, and decide whether it was a possibility or not, and write up a contract so everybody was on the same page, sign the contract, which also, it was on me to fulfill my obligation, and on them too. And what I found is that the posters, we might print 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000, one poster in the right place could be seen by thousands of people.
Right.
And could really help maybe make a change in people's perception of, in this case, importance of natural spaces, of the animals, of our relationship to nature, of, the huge issues facing us, climate change, global warming, water, air, just, the planet.
Yeah, I
Pretty-
mean, with
pretty
all these
important.
organizations coming to you now, I mean, you've built this platform through grit, talent, dedication, all of that. And now organizations are coming to you. How do you make choices about, what do you want to say yes to?
Well, I kind of decided I would step back. I'm 69 now, and I went through a period with my late wife, Mary Beth Percival, who was very ill with Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, okay.
And I became her caregiver. And I found it was just too difficult to do everything.
Yeah.
Keep the gallery open. At times I would have 7 or 8 employees. So you're writing
That's
a
a lot.
payroll. You're responsible for that. So, a painting might sell and help cover that. And but I decided and with suggestions by some close friends, you should think about stepping away from that. And I was like, thought about it, and I made a decision to do that. And she passed away. And then in the intervening time, I met a wonderful lady, and I got married again.
Okay.
And we're working together. Her name is Mary, and she's just been, wonderful. It kind of brought my life
Sure.
back to life.
Yeah, yeah.
And my painting life. So I started painting again, and kind of not taking on the commissions.
Okay.
Taking
You
on
wanna
a
do
few
work
things.
for you.
Taking on a few things. I've recently done some paintings for the new Stockman Bank, and they've been wonderful to work with because there was, really, you're the artist, we're the bankers, So I worked on a series of large-scale landscapes that are now up in their
Up in
their
the new building.
banks here and
Fantastic.
going to other areas too. So that's been nice, and I was, and at the same time on my other easels I have my own paintings going.
Sure.
They're related. Might have a little different, like my polar bear on the iceberg, or a few other things like that.
Sure.
My rhino. Although there are some microbes we should be concerned about too.
Yeah, painting those must be a challenge.
That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, and so one of the reasons we're talking, Monte, is your work is on display at the MAMAC and part of the spring exhibition. I think it opened January 17th and runs until mid-May, if I recall.
I think into June now.
Into June, okay.
Yeah.
So is some of this work you're talking about going to be in this exhibition? How are you making choices about what to put on display here?
It will be. I'm working with the curator and director,
Raphael?
Jeremy and Raphael.
Oh, okay.
And they made the choices, and I had hoped. I mean, I have many posters and prints, lithographs and things, but I wanted as many original works.
Yeah.
To be in the exhibit as possible. So we've done that. And I think it reflects the connection I've had with environment and nature. That's more of the focus of this exhibit. And there's a book that we're also, it should be out in May.
Okay.
And that'll be...
You've set a deadline for yourself publicly now.
Yes, we've worked on it quite a bit. And the book will be mostly the last 20 years of my work. I had a book come out 20 years ago, 200-page, really beautiful hardcover art book with a foreword by Onyx Smith, so a wonderful writer and friend. And this book will accompany that. It'll be the same size and shape, and I'm really looking forward to it finally being printed, hopefully in the next few months.
Awesome.
So it should be out in time to be there for the latter part of the exhibition.
Okay. And so, kind of, it seems like you're experiencing a bit of a renaissance as well. Your work being on display, creating some new original works, stepping back from the gallery, making a new relationship. How is that influencing? Is it influencing your inspiration and how you sort of approach your art?
It is. I just returned from travels in Europe. I spent time in Amsterdam and in Venice, attending the Venice Biennale, which is, it happens every 2 years, and it's the oldest and longest running international art exhibition.
Okay.
And that is amazing. You can actually see what Poland's doing or what Azerbaijan is doing. I mean, countries that you might not be exposed to.
Yeah.
Iran, with our America's certain issues with different countries, from China to Iran to Korea. In Italy, at the Biennale, many of those nations are there, and you get to see what their artists are thinking, or what their leaders are suggesting they think.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So, and then if you grow a little weary of, and it's all contemporary, you can take a break in one of the many churches in Venice and look at, incredible frescoes by Tintoretto and Titian and other masters of the Renaissance.
So you got the stuff that's happening now, and then the stuff that happened centuries ago, and it's got to be wild.
Link between the two, because personally, I've always valued, the use and technique that goes with handling the materials, and I've always been very careful to work with the best materials, like best paint, so these things will last, and the use of those materials and the techniques I've developed to create something that's beautifully made. So I value that. It's like we went to there's an instrument museum. Many fine violins and cellos and violas were made in Italy.
Right.
And those are just beautiful things to look at, They weren't stamped out. I mean,
sure, things that are made to endure.
They're made, by craftspeople.
Yeah.
So I value craftsmanship, technique, but you don't want those to overpower the importance of a vision or an idea that you have. So trying to find the right balance between those things, and it's a never-ending process, So hoping I'll get there someday.
Well, that seems like a great way to kind of bring the conversation to a close. Monte, so inspiring to learn more about your story, your approach to your work, and really excited about this exhibition. I encourage everybody to go check it out, check out the new book. And where else can people find people can find your work in a ton of places, but where would any place you'd like to direct them?
Dolack.com.
Okay, Dolack.com.
I have a website, and then my posters in Missoula are available at Frame of Mind.
Okay.
Gallery and Frame Shop.
Well, Monte, all the best, and happy trails.
Well, thank you so much. It was fun.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that one as much as I did. Get yourself down to the MAMAC and check out the exhibition. Okay, coming up next week, we have a Montana native who's tearing up the charts as a songwriter in Nashville, John Pierce. Excited to bring you that conversation and some live music next week. Thanks for listening to A New Angle. We really appreciate it. And we're coming to you from Studio 49, a gift from University of Montana alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. And remember that A New Angle is supported by CED, Consolidated Electrical Distributors. These guys pretty much sell anything electrical you would ever need, but they also hire a ton of our students. If you want to learn more about jobs at CED, visit cedcareers.com. Before we go, I want to thank some important peeps, executive producer Stefan Borsum, and interns Aspen Runkle and Max Gibson. Huge thanks to VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks for the tunes, and finally, props to Jeff Meese, our master of all things sound. Finally, if you have any questions, suggestions, comments, insults, whatever, please email me at anewangle@umontana.edu. Help us spread the word, and be sure to use the hashtag #anewangle when you do. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.